Our next speaker is known to all of us here in the room. I first saw her a few years ago when she was, I think, the deputy of DeMita, and I thought to myself, gee, she's got it going on. She's hot. She knows what she's talking about. She is now the Commissioner for Public Sector Employment with the Office for Public Sector. Please welcome to the lectern the wonderful Erma Ranieri.
So I'm talking to my staff about who puts me straight after Rabia. I consider myself to be a good speaker, but heck, that is amazing. I want to thank you very much for your inspiring speech. A couple of things that came out of that for me, because today I'm not actually speaking about my own journey, I'm actually talking about the public sector choosing to actually launch this strategy. So today I'm talking about what it is that we're doing. But some of the things that Rabia actually talked about are stories that we all have. I certainly have quite a few elements of that story from a non-English speaking background, from having, I guess, times of shame, and then how you actually reconcile that shame and actually try and show the courage to actually stand up to some of the things that you've actually seen. We all have that story, and it's from that platform that I'm actually coming from, certainly as Commissioner, but as a senior, one of the 3 senior women in the public service. It can be very, very difficult at times to have that voice. It can be very difficult in relation to the things that Martin Parkinson talked about around unconscious bias. It can be very difficult when you know that your voice hasn't actually been heard, even though I reckon it was the loudest one in the room. That is actually a very, very important message. I want to thank a few people. Firstly, Tammy for bringing the speakers to Delphina, Nanzili, who's actually been chairing our steering group. We are very serious about this strategy. We have a steering group, we have Scott Ashby on it, we have the Under-Treasurer on it, we have the Premier's Council for Women, and Amanda's on it, we have the Office for Women. The public service is serious about this strategy. And what I wanted to do today was actually tell you what's in it. You've heard from speakers today about the things we need to address. And I have to agree with the debating team. For those people that talked about the rules and the rest of it, and look, I was about to clap for the team that actually said we have a level playing field. Good work to you all. Because in fact, the public service is a leader in relation to its rules, the things that we have, things around flexible work arrangements. The question I have is why aren't we using it, and why isn't it as inclusive as it should be? And I think we need to put the money where our mouth is and actually do something serious about that. I was also interviewed yesterday in relation to the strategy, wanted to get a bit of airplay for it, and in that interview the first question that came to me was, why would you be having a strategy when you're doing so well compared to everyone else? And the only thing I said to them was, because here I am, sort of 30 years into my career, and it's 2016, I have a 25-year-old daughter who's experiencing similar sort of issues, and we're still talking about it. It is not okay. We don't represent 50% of the population. So where's my clicker? Oh, thanks, Matt. She's working for me here. I love it. Well done. So you have, I think, copies of the strategy on the table. And I want to recognise the entire Senior Management Council. Our name is behind this. So we are being held to account. It has to start from the top. That's what I heard from Martin Parkinson. That's what I believe. We all do play a strong part, but you need to see it being modelled from the top down. The Premier also mentioned at an event we had, and a lot of this work that's in this strategy has come from you. We actually heard a lot of people saying these are the sorts of things that we need to do to address gender inequality. We also need to do a whole lot of things just to address the issue around equality for people from diverse backgrounds, for people that may have not had the same upbringing as us, and our institutional arrangements, our policies, our practices are not as inclusive as they should be, and we should not be talking about it, we should be changing it. And I think the message I certainly got from Rabia is, as the Commissioner for Public Sector Employment, I am determined to make sure that those policies and practices are changed together with my colleagues. The Premier did say at that conference though, Diversity Dividend Forum last year, he said something about the system. It was designed by men for men. If you heard about the institution, the public institution we're in, it was historically a system designed by men for men. We need men to step up beside women and work with us to change the system so that it works for all of us. That's our strategy. It's online. We didn't print off a lot of copies, but it will be online, and you'll be able to access it through the Office for the Public Sector. You've seen these statistics before. So the public sector employment is made up of 68% women, 32% men. When you look at some of the figures around the executives, it's no longer the same percentage. 45% in our executive ranks, and when you look at what we call the South Australian Executive Service, it's 37%. What's the difference? Public sector also includes nurses, doctors, teachers, and predominantly those occupations have about 80%, probably, women in their workforce. And we're still not up to that percentage. Not that it has to be, but we should at least be 50%. But what's really important about the South Australian Executive Service, it's where the decisions are actually made. It's where I think you can have the most influence, and that has to be 50%. Now, we've come a long way. We were 26% about 10 years ago, so we're doing really well. But that doesn't mean that within the institution it's inclusive for everyone, and we need to actually be showing that we are taking some action. 75% of women are at the entry level. This is where we're skewed in terms of the gender pay gap, because often they're the people that actually don't earn the big bucks. So women would be, the gap in our document here, it says 16% is the pay gap. I think that's closing, but there is a gap. That means we're being paid less for the same work, or not able to get to those high levels in executive. When we had our seminar and forum, these were the top things that people said were actually an issue within their organisation. So we're going to actually try and tackle them in this strategy. The top barriers to gender equality that we believed, and we've certainly heard it today, is the unconscious bias. The things that we don't even know that go on, and how we describe that and how we actually come to the fore. And the first step is about self-awareness. The first step is to actually understand what we believe and what our value system is. The commitment from the top, the leadership commitment, the commitment from your managers, and the fact that we will hold people to account on implementing some of these strategies. And also in making sure that women are included in whatever is occurring in their organisations, just as Martin Parkinson talked about in his Department of Treasury, and the things he uncovered that he was not aware of. The organisational culture, I don't need to talk a lot about that. You've heard that. You've heard about it. You've heard about people's value system. You've heard about the sorts of things that Rabbi has talked about. We all have different backgrounds. We all have different ways of seeing things. It's about making sure that you have at least some understanding of where that person's coming from and walking in their shoes. Our recruitment and promotion processes, we think we've got it covered. We've got merit-based principle covered. We've got it covered. We used to do it in the public sector. Well, I heard today, if you have 3 people sitting on that panel from that organisation, it is not merit. So you need to think differently about how you do that. So as Commissioner, we need to revisit our recruitment and selection processes. We need to say, you need a panel 50-50, if not, why not, as Martin Parkinson was saying. We have had that before. We think we've got it covered. We have not, and we need to deal with it. And workplace flexibility. We have great flexible work practices. We are leading as a public sector in relation to the sorts of things we have in place. Are we using it? I'm not sure. The places that are leaders that actually believe in it and provide that. So I'm suggesting, and we need to look at, we flex roles, and if not, why not? And go back and have a look at how we've described jobs, in what sort of institutional arrangement, what sort of hours we're sort of saying they need to be worked at, and actually let's go the other way and say let's flex up these roles, all of them, unless they are specifically needing to do things at particular times. Then I think we'll certainly challenge what the system is looking like. The other barriers that were identified, 50% of women are victims, 50% of the women who are victims of domestic violence need to change their working conditions to escape their attacker or because of the low self-esteem it causes. And one of the things that we actually picked up, and we are addressing it in the strategy, is workplace harassment seemed to be kind of an issue, and I think that's very closely related to domestic violence and how we actually manage that in the workplace. And we'll talk a little bit about what the state government's actually done around the 15 days extra leave around that, but that's just only one part of the problem. It's actually the unconscious bias is how comfortable people feel talking about their circumstances. It's only then that we'll be able to address the issues around harassment, low self-esteem, and people wanting to get out of a situation so they don't have to explain what's actually been happening to them. Let's create an environment where we can actually talk openly about that, or at least to someone we trust. The cultural assumptions about women's aspirations, availability and capacity. I think that's a very big one, and we need to talk more about that, and we do address it in the strategy. And failure to implement policies rather than policies being unavailable. So we have a lot of policies, we have a lot of good practices on paper. What I don't see a lot of, or do see some very good pockets within government, is the practice around those policies, and it's often because of the leader. And often as chief executives or leaders at the top, we may not see the unconscious bias that's actually happening in organisations, and everyone in this room needs to actually have a voice about where it's not happening and the ability to actually talk about it in your organisations if it isn't happening. The strategy, I officially launch it. What's it going to do? It's going to build and maintain an inclusive public sector leadership, and in particular where women and men are equally represented, valued and rewarded. And I'd like to go to Martin Parkinson's point about diversity. This is about everyone feeling like they have a place in leadership in the South Australian public sector, because we represent the community, and we need to actually make sure that that physically, emotionally and in values we represent the community. So we have worked on that steering committee with the people I talked about, and I want to acknowledge the hard work. So we're serious about it, and today's the first day of launching it, and we're heading straight into some strategies in terms of what we're going to do. There are 3 pillars: leadership, accountability, empowered workplaces and the talent pipeline. Leadership. We need our senior leaders to actively support and advocate for gender equality. We need to put our money where our mouth is, not just women in senior roles, not just Joz, Sandy and myself, but we need men in particular to be talking about it. And I was really happy to hear the head, the most senior public servant in Australia today, talking about how important it was for not only the public sector as a whole, but for productivity and innovation. And we know we need that seriously in South Australia. So why would we actually take away our ability to actually promote that? Workplaces that are empowered. What's a supportive culture for women and men? What's a supportive culture when it means that we have to reconcile things outside of work as well? I know the best times I had were leaders that actually accepted that I needed to reconcile my looking after my family because I wanted to, but I also wanted a career. And I chose by choosing the leader that supported me. I didn't choose the department or the role or the money or the seniority. I chose someone that would allow me to reconcile those two things. That is the culture that I chose. And when they explicitly said that they would address those gender biases, I was even more elated in relation to the policies and procedures we changed. Every single organisation in the South Australian public sector needs to look at that. And most importantly, we need a talent pipeline. I think ours is leaking. And I know. There are reasons why people don't go to the top. It's not pretty on any day, I can tell you. But we need people to get up there and also change it. And why do women in particular choose to get out of coming to senior roles? Well, firstly, they don't want to work the hours. There's a myth. Well, there isn't a myth, we do it. But we need to change that. We need to change what happens to women as they go on to that journey to the top. Because I think there are biases when we talk about panels and the way we actually describe selection processes, who's on that panel, technical expertise, all those job descriptions and 20, 30 years old. It is done in a very different domain and it needs to be reviewed and changed for currency, and we need to do that urgently if we're going to actually tap into the talent of all South Australians. So to fix a system, you need to take a variety of approaches. So what are we going to do? For leadership, we're going to actually look at leaders actively supporting and advocating for gender equality through succession plans. Chief executives will be expected to be putting together succession plans if they haven't already. And those succession plans are about talent, and those succession plans are also about the women that they need to bring up to their organisations because they haven't had opportunities in the past. We're talking about reverse mentoring programs because, quite frankly, I don't think, coaching women over and over again, we don't need to be fixed. What we need to do is actually be talking to some of our male counterparts about what it feels like when you're actually experiencing some of that unconscious bias, that ability to have some self-awareness and the ability to talk to each other. What is going on for you? And for that to be taken generously from the person you're talking to. And we are going to be looking at the gender pay gap. We're going to do an analysis and some research with the Office for Women and basically say what are the issues and how are we going to redress them. We are going to tackle those issues. Empowered workplaces. We will roll out unconscious bias training, and that's coming in the next month or two. In fact, I think David Reynolds is getting a real rap here from Treasury and Finance. They've got unconscious bias training happening next week on Tuesday. Don't know if there's any round of applause for David. I think that's great. Very important that we start that conversation. I was asked when I was being interviewed for the paper, what do you mean by reverse mentoring? And I tried to explain that unless you're able to actually have someone hear what your expressions are, if you have lived with shame, if you don't want to talk about the issues around domestic violence, or if something's happening in your life, if you don't trust that person, if you believe that there is other things that they might get you with and not be able to have a conversation about the things you see in the organisation, or worse still, it'll do something to your chances of being in that organisation, you will not express yourself. So we have to have open discussion about what that looks like before we can even get to the point of me giving feedback to someone about what it is that I'm actually feeling. If it's not safe, it will not be expressed. So we have to make it safer for people to talk about it. We need to evaluate and promote the use of flexible work arrangements. I have done that myself for 15 years as I was raising my children. I gave lots of my time outside of work, and I was paid a lot less than everyone else for the work that I was doing. It is time for us to basically genuinely look at flexible work arrangements. We should flex up any job, and if we can't, you've got to explain why not. And I want to also recognise Delphina, the Valuer General, for the work she's done with her workforce that's actually empowered men to do more of the caring as well. So well done to you, Delphina, for that work. And the final one is the talent pipeline. It's not the lack of female talent. You saw the statistics. We've got them. You heard about how many women are actually educated. It's the pipeline that's leaking for a whole lot of reasons. Oh, we've lost that. We need to ensure that recruitment and selection practices include sustainable initiatives that attract, develop and retain women along the talent pipeline. We need to bring in 50-50 panels, absolutely, and we need to look at that in our policies around recruitment selection. I'm prepared to do that. There is no excuses for us not representing the people that will be applying for those roles. There is also no excuses around how many people can come to the table for a position. We actually have to find them. And we have to look at how we're actually defining roles and whether people are prepared to apply for them. We must look at that in the public service. Women in leadership programs are important. Christine Nixon has done something with us for the last 2 days. We women like to talk about some of those issues and we like to do it as a group. I think it's also important for men to be included in some of those discussions so we're all aware of what's happening. So we'll continue to do that. And of course, a sponsorship program. I'm not talking mentoring, coaching. I'm actually talking about sponsorship. And that is for those men that have basically the openings to board meetings, to networks that we have never been part of. And I can personally say that has certainly been the case for me. I thank those men in particular that have opened those doors, that have actually watched my back when it was being stabbed with knives or whatever. But they looked after me. Their sponsorship is about making sure that someone's opening the door for you that actually lets you into that board, lets you into that boardroom table and lets you into a particular club that you have never been part of. And with my different cultural background, I was never part of that. I didn't understand that language and you would have your own stories about that. So sponsorship is about how you will watch someone's back and advocate for them as you go along. Of course, mentoring and coaching is important. We'll continue all that, but this is about leadership. How do we get them to that point? On that note, I want to end by saying that gender equality in leadership is achievable. We've achieved a lot in just 10 years. And makes a powerful positive difference to the productivity, effectiveness and potential for innovation in the public sector. I know it can. But most importantly, we must enable women to participate more fully in decision-making roles. It will help the community, it will help us, because after all, it's the fair thing to do and it's where I started. It's actually 2016. Let's do it.